that at some point he was also seconded to Congo, where he spent a few years. So he was no longer at SECOS. He remained in Congo for a long time, seconded to a UN mission in the Congo. End of quote. Can you give us any clarification, further information about that? Answer. Okay, I see. I told you yesterday that all SECOS staff were not managed by SECOS. I said that they remain under the organic authority of their corps of origin, which may call them back at any time, reassign them or not to us, as the case may be. Captain Zoloa was called back to his corps unit, the gendarmerie, at some point, and the gendarmerie subsequently, at the request, because you know there is always a test of all officers for recruitment to Haiti or to the Congo. So he passed the examination on behalf of the gendarmerie and was subsequently detached to the Congo. But this did not happen under the authority of SECOS. It happened when he had already returned to his original unit, namely the National Gendarmerie. Answer very well. Now, still about Captain Zoloa. It was your testimony that, and this is at page 12 and 13 of the transcript of the 28th of March, French transcript, that he was unwell throughout the crisis. And I quote you, throughout the crisis, he was ill and he was at home, unwell. And so before I left, he was at his home, end of quote. Can you, sir, please shed a little more light regarding his state of health or his illness, if you know anything more? Answer. I can confirm that the captain was unwell. And the doctors, the doctor of the gendarmerie school certified his ill health, and so he was given medical leave throughout the crisis. He was no longer operational within the ranks throughout the duration of the crisis. Question. Very well. Now let me read your statement to the investigators of the OTP, and the reference is 0051-0392 at page 0397. I quote, interviewer number 1, do you know what his illness was? And to be specific for my learned colleagues, for their benefit, I'm looking at line 158. Interviewer number 1, do you know what his illness was? Person being interviewed. During a training session, he was injured, I think. So he remained at his home throughout. Interviewer number 1, for how long? Person being interviewed. It took quite some time. He was not available for at least a month. 1 month? Answer, yes, at least 1 month. Person, or rather, interviewer number 3. When was he injured by bullet? Person being interviewed. 1. Interviewer 3. When was he injured? Person being interviewed. He was injured, I believe, in October, November, I believe. or maybe even earlier than that, end of quote. So, Mr. Witness, so to be clear, on the 16th of December 2010, you state that he was not at his post. Is that the case? Answer, he was unwell. He was at his home receiving treatment. Question, very well. So you told us on the 28th of March, French transcript, page 11, that you left the gendarmerie school on the 31st of March 2011, and I quote you. At page 10, line 28, in answer to the question, and I'm quoting, during the crisis, when did you leave the École de Gendarmerie? Your answer at page 11, on the 31st of March 2011. And then you add, still on page 11, line 19, and I quote, when I left my position, my post, all the trainees or the student gendarmes and officers were given leave. As for the officers, for purposes of their own security, were granted leave because we had specific information to the effect that the school was a target and that I myself was a target. End of quote. Now, Mr. Witness, what did you mean by the school was a target?
Cela veut dire que l'école était...
Answer. This meant that the school was likely to be attacked based on the intelligence we had gathered at that time. The school could have come under attack at any time. Question, by whom?
As...
By those whom we were fighting against, by those whom the FDS were confronting.
D'accord. Que voulez-vous dire par moi-même, j'étais une cible?
Question. What did you mean by I myself was a target? Answer. Going by the same intelligence, my life was in danger and it was possible that I could be attacked personally.
en train d'affronter.
By the same persons we were fighting against.
Là que les responsables des forces de...
Question. Are you saying therefore that the officials of the FDS had become targets of their adversaries? Answer. That is even more true, given that on the same day, that is on the 31st, or maybe before, it might have been on the 30th or the 31st, the residence of the Chief of General Staff of the armies was attacked and ransacked. He himself had to seek refuge in a foreign embassy on the 31st.
Comprenons-nous bien?
Question. Just to understand ourselves clearly, did you say that on the 31st there was an attack on the officers of the FDS? Is that what you're saying? Answer. I repeat what I said. On the 31st, I have information or I had information or intelligence to the effect that I was a target and the school was a target, targeted by those whom we were fighting. Now, on the same day, on the 31st, I was informed that the residence of the Chief of General Staff, which was located in Yopougon, had been ransacked, and that the Chief of General Staff himself had sought refuge on that very day in an embassy in Abidjan. Question, very well. Did anything special happen on the 31st in that context? Was there a change of context which may have explained why those attacks happened or why there were such threats of an attack? Answer. On the 31st, the military situation on the ground had evolved in a manner that was not in our favor. In the night of the 30th to the 31st, all the units, all the detachments which were at the front, all withdrew or retreated or fell back to Abidjan.
Pourquoi?
Question. Why? Answer. Under pressure from the enemy.
Pour qu'on comprenne bien, vous voulez dire...
Question. To help us understand better, are you saying that the detachments of the Ivorian army or the gendarmes or the police which were deployed across the country all withdrew to Abidjan on the 30th and the 31st? Answer, yes. On the 31st of March, all forces have withdrawn to Abidjan.
Question. My question is why? Because they were under attack? Answer, because they had been attacked. They were under severe pressure and they all retreated to Abidjan. Question, very well. So what you are talking about here is military pressure. Is that correct? Answer, yes, obviously. Question, very well. From whom? Answer, the enemy. Question. My question, Mr. President, is who was the enemy? Who is the enemy? That is the question that I'm putting to you, Mr. Witness. Answer. The enemy is the enemy that we have been talking about since the very beginning of this questioning. Do I need to mention who is the enemy all the time? I believe we have talked sufficiently about that ever since counsel for the prosecution was questioning me, and even when you started questioning me. So we fully understand each other on the concept of enemy. Question, Mr. Witness, the records have information indicating that the government forces of Ivory Coast outside of Abidjan were attacked not only by what you refer to as the enemy, but also by French forces, particularly French combat helicopters. Are you aware of that? Answer, at the General Staff, we had some information, particularly during the meeting of the 30th, but we were in Abidjan. But the commanders at the front sent in that intelligence to the Chief of Staff. Question, very well. Now, retreat of the government forces on the 31st of March. At what time did the enemy that you are talking about reach Abidjan? I suppose they were pursuing the government forces. So at what time did they reach Abidjan? Answer. After the 31st, we no longer had meetings at the General Staff headquarters. We were dispersed, so I no longer had any military follow-up of the operations. It was no longer possible for me to have those. Question. Whether there was military follow-up or not. If there was an attack 300 meters away from you, you would know about it. So my question is, when did the enemy reach Abidjan? Answer, but I was no longer in position. I was no longer in my duty post. I was no longer able to have access to that type of information, because when you are monitoring an operation, it is possible to have that information in real time because you have men in the field. But there were no longer any meetings at the General Staff headquarters, so I could not have this information. If I tell you things that I did not personally observe in the field, that would not be honest on my part. Question. Yes, I understand you very well, Mr. Witness. You are quite correct to underscore what is important to you and to distinguish between what you heard and what you witnessed. But yesterday you told us that from where you were, you observed columns of vehicles with cannons. When was that? Before or after the 31st? Answer. I point out that the information that I gave you yesterday date from after the 12th of April. Question. Very well. You do not know precisely when the enemy reached Abidjan. That is understood. But do you know the composition of the enemy troops that entered Abidjan approximately during that period? I'm asking that question because when I say who, how were the enemy troops composed? What types of soldiers? Which groups? Which units? Where did they come from? So if you have FRCI troops and there were many other combatants who were not. Question. And based on what you heard, where did these combatants come from? Answer. From all the countries of West Africa. In any case, from many countries in West Africa. Question. Very well. Were there any dozos amongst the enemy troops which entered Abidjan during that period? Answer. The dozos were amongst the troops that attacked us, so their presence was known ever since 2002. Question. Very well. Am I to understand that ever since 2002, amongst those who were the rebels and who started or continued attacking the FDS right up to 2010, 2011, there were always dozos amongst them. Is that correct? Answer. Yes. Yes. Question. Very well. And would it be correct to say, based on what you have just said, that there were always fighters from various countries neighboring to Cote d'Ivoire? Answer. from the beginning of the crisis, ever since 2002, that was a constant. Question. So your answer is yes? Answer, yes. Question. Thank you. From time to time, I want you to be more specific because after some time, we will be looking at your testimony in transcripts, and we will not have the context. So we really want to avoid any uncertainties. Now, these enemy troops that advanced from the north towards the south and to Abidjan, to your knowledge, were they guilty of any crimes during their advance from the north towards Abidjan? Answer. The only information that was known publicly was the events that took place in Dje. Everyone in Cote d'Ivoire knows that. Even the international community is aware of that. What happened in Prt1, the massacres that took place there, everyone is aware. But elsewhere, I'm not aware. In Yopougon, based on what was said later on, there were clashes and there were young people who were not necessarily combatants who were killed in Yopougon. Question. And who were killed by the enemy forces that you are talking about? Is that correct? Answer. Yes. Question. Very well. Can you tell us something briefly about Dje Bi so that we should better understand who attacked, what happened, and what were the consequences? Answer. The forces that were attacking us in Dje Bi attacked members of the population. There were many people killed. There were many people killed, and many houses burnt down. Question. When you said many people killed, do you include men and women also? Answer. Yes, these were not combatants. They were members of the population living in their village. So that's where they were killed, and it includes all segments of the population. Question. Very well. Killed, you talked about by the enemy, of course, but do you know who was in command of the enemy forces in Dje Bi at the time of the massacre? Answer. The facts were sufficiently documented by the investigators of many organizations, many international organizations. And the names that were regularly mentioned was, and his men, and there was also another military leader at that time who was on duty in Mang. He is Ivorian, and his name was Loss. This information is in the public domain after several investigations of the international community. Question. And to assist us, can you spell out the names of the two warlords that you talked about?
Record, and sorry to interrupt, to my learned friend, just to have the time frame, because of course we have a period which is charged and then that ends at a certain time, and just to be very clear about the time frame we're talking about now, just so that for the record that is clear.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Artit, Mr. President. I'm not sure this is an objection because people ask questions the way they want, and nothing prevents my learned friend to ask for clarification during re-examination. She can do that. Regarding what we are talking about here, the temporal framework is clear because it is when the enemy forces advanced towards Abidjan in March 2011. It seemed to me to be very clear. But I can still put the question again to the witness if you think it is necessary, Mr. President.
No, I don't think so much it's necessary because these facts, as the witness also said, are in public domain. So, but if you recall us, just for the record, when this happened in Dje.
Je pense que
the witness. Dates are very problematic, especially if the events took place so long ago, but I think it was in March, April 2011.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Alti, thank you, Mr. President.
Alors,
did you have any information about who was supervising those enemy forces from the north to Abidjan? Who had organized them? Let me ask the question in other words. Do you have information of French involvement in that offensive or advance from the north to the south? Answer: I admit that I have no factual or objective information about that, apart from what people were saying. But to be quite frank, I cannot base myself on hearsay. As a military leader, I have no factual information to confirm what you have said. But in regard to what we said a short while ago, I would like to clarify that the Burkinabe war leaders or the enemy leader, the Burkinabe person I was talking about, was arrested by the judicial authorities, and he's currently in detention. Question, thank you. Now let us talk about radio communications. And before we go to that, let me conclude on what we were talking a short while ago. You had said that you left the gendarmerie school on the 31st of March. You left on the 31st of March. Is that correct? Answer: yes. Question, when did you evacuate your officers and your gendarmes? Answer: the officers who remained at the school when my security detail was taking me to shelter, they took care of that. It was not in my presence, but it was during that same day of the 31st of March. Question, so the evacuation took place on the 31st of March. We agree on that. Answer, for the students. Question, very well. On page 12 of the French transcript of the 28th of March, you told us that you left some gendarmes on the spot so that the location should not be abandoned. Let me quote you so as to be clear. clear. It is page 12, and I believe it is line 1, and I quote, "A group of circus elements was asked, a very limited group was asked to remain there to ensure security of the barracks. But in the event that things changed against them, they should be able to leave." Those were the instructions that were left behind. And during your testimony, later on the 29th of March, and this is on page 44 of the French transcript, line 16, you stated, "The headquarters of SECOS had premises that we had guarded by small groups of you left that small group of 564 men guarding the exits to continue guarding the place with the possibility of leaving if they were overwhelmed." Answer: those were the instructions. Question: so it was that small detachment that you left? Answer: yes. Question: very well. Now let me move on to radio communications. The prosecutor asked you questions about the SECOS radio network. On the 27th of March, page 60, 5960 of the French transcript, and on page 60 you testified that you mainly used the telephone. There was a question on line 10, and I quote from that page and line, "How did you communicate with the sector commanders of SECOS most of the time?" And your answer: by telephone. Question: by cell phone? Your answer: always. End of quote. Mr. Witness, I would like to know, with regard to the equipment, did each patrol or intervention group of SECOS, and yesterday you told us that the patrols were 6 men, is that correct? Answer: yes. Question: did each patrol or intervention group have a radio?
Autant que faire se peut, on avait équipé.
Answer: to the extent possible, the various vehicles were equipped with radio sets, that is, if they were available, and each head of detachment was given a radio set, a mobile radio set and receiver.
Est-il juste de dire que vous manquiez de...
Question: is it correct to say that you lacked radio communication resources at SECOS? Answer: it was not only at SECOS, it was all the forces, the gendarmerie, and particularly the army. They did not have the tactical military transmission resources for the field, and they did not have secured communication links over the radio, and in the field these communications really have to be secure, or encrypted so as to avoid any interference. Question, to your knowledge, were your radio and telephone communications monitored by French services? Answer, I do not know whether they were monitored by French services, but those of us using radio communications, we could be monitored or listened to by each user who was familiar with electronics, because access was easy. If you have some rudimentary equipment, you could have access to the frequencies and listen to the gendarmerie, the army, or SECOS networks. Question, very well.
Avez-vous été informé?
Were you informed of the recruitment of mercenaries by rebel forces in Burkina in early 2010? Answer, no. Question, very well. Was the gendarmerie aware that groups of combatants had been infiltrated into Abidjan before or during the presidential elections? Answer, what we knew was that there were many detachments of the FAFN that had come to provide security for the elections within the framework of the CCI. And these detachments had been taken into account by the General Staff, which deployed them in the main polling stations in Abidjan. But the infiltrations that you are talking about were an open secret, because everyone knew that these types of things were always possible, not only in 2010, but ever since 2002 that such activities were observed.
D'accord.
Question, very well. Was the gendarmerie aware that there were arms caches in Abidjan for the intention of the rebel groups before the elections or immediately afterwards, the presidential elections? Answer, I have no idea about that. Question. Over the past few days, you told us about 3 meetings with the President of the Republic, and you explained, page 95 of the French transcript of the 29th of March, you said that each time you were meeting with the head of state, it was the SEMA who spoke on behalf of all the soldiers, and I will quote, it was on line 8. Yes, I think the interpreter is ready. For us, soldiers, each time we were in the presence of the head of state, it was the SEMA, that is the chief of staff, who spoke on behalf of all the soldiers, end of quote. What I would like to ask you, Mr. Witness, is to explain to us concretely how did these meetings take place materially, and what was the duration please illustrate a little bit. Did you arrive together or separately? Did you meet at the door? I think maybe the first person who entered was the chief of staff. How did it happen?
Suggesting things of how they may present themselves and appear. Well, just ask the question.
Well, that's a bit...
Monsieur le Président.
Oui.
Merci.
Mr. Altit, Mr. President, the question is clear. How were these meetings conducted? And to be specific about what I am asking about, I am giving some possibilities, and it will be up to the witness to say what he wants to say so as to explain to us how it happened.
Simplified, which was not really needed, but please, Mr. Witness, answer the question. Thank you.
We had several types of the normal period, but there were meetings that we had with the head of state during the crisis period. These were meetings whose objective was related. The objectives were related to military operations. So it was the soldiers whose spokesperson was the chief of staff, who came to give a situation report. And for that to happen, we had a preparatory meeting, and the chief of staff who was conducting the operations, because and so he did not need to be briefed because he conducted the operations. So he would gather together all the military information and intelligence, and he would be accompanied not only by the generals but by the respective staffs of some of the major commanders. The room, then the president would come in. He was also surrounded by his main collaborators, his advisors, and then he would give the floor to the chief of staff, who would give a military situation report. That is how it happened.
D'accord.
Question, very well.
Permettez une seconde.
One moment, please.
Alors,
Okay. Now, I think that it was the day before yesterday when you answered a question from the representative of the OTP, and you mentioned the defensive statements made by the president. Do you recall whether during those three meetings the president gave specific instructions in relation to military operations? And did he play a role that was somewhat akin to, or how do I put it now? Or did he play an active role in the, how do I put this now? Did he go into any details? Let's put it that way. Did he go into any details?
Part, I would ask, and I'm sorry to my learned friend to interrupt, which meeting and what the witness has previously said regarding what the President said, just for the sake of clarity. And that's it.
Monsieur le Président.
Yes.
Maître Altit.
To which meeting the witness refers in answering the question. This is, I think, it's relevant. It's very important for the record. Maître Altit.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Maître Altit, thank you, Mr. President. Just a word on that point. I agree with that. But that's why I put the question to the witness broadly. And it's the same questions that were put to him by the OTP in these last days. I asked whether these meetings followed the same format. I think the witness appears to have answered those questions. If they followed the same format, we can deal with the 3 meetings accordingly. But let's put the question to the witness in any event. Mr. Witness, did these meetings follow the same format? Please, could you answer that question?
Je disais tantôt que...
Answer. A short while ago, I was saying that when it comes to the 2 major meetings that held at the plateau, at the presidential palace, the object was the same, and it all happened more or less in the same manner, involving quite often the same participants.
Bon, alors écoutez, pour être...
Question. Okay. Therefore, to be very clear, I'll now put my question to you in another format. And for that purpose, I would refer to your statement to the OTP. At 0051-0462, page 0472.
J'attends un peu, mais je crois que tout le monde est prêt.
I'm waiting. I hope everybody's ready now. Line 368. Interviewer number 1. I quote, "Very well. Did the President provide any opinions or opinions in relation to the military operations and how they should be conducted?" Person being interviewed, what type? What type of opinion? Interviewer number 1. Do you remember whether the President gave any other specific instructions in relation to the types of military operations that should be conducted during those meetings? But person being interviewed, and that's your answer, no, I don't believe that he gave any details on the military operations to the HQ. I believe that the HQ simply reported to him.
Alors, à la page...
Then, at 0016-0014, page 0097, and we'll wait for everybody to get to that page.
Je cite, enquêteur 2.
I quote, interviewer 2, when it comes to that specific mission, or what were the instructions in relation to what happened on the ground in Abobo? Person being interviewed, that is yourself, he does not give specific instructions of an operational nature. That is not really his role. He globally stated as follows: I would like you to hold the ground. I don't want to lose Abobo. I don't want you to lose Abobo. Hold Abobo. Those were the types of general instructions that he gave. The type of general instructions that he gave. End of quote. Therefore, my question:
Pour chacune des 3 réunions dont nous parlons,
for each of the 3 meetings we're talking about, was that the case, namely that he gave general instructions? Answer: well, when it comes to the 2 main meetings that took place at the plateau, I remember clearly, but maybe not every detail, I remember clearly all the same, that the president gave instructions but never delved into any details about military operations. However, of all the presidents of Cote d'Ivoire whom I knew, he was the only one who had been in the army and who knew the army, but he never went into any details concerning military operations. He always gave instructions as follows: hold on. That is what I told the prosecutor the other day. Madam Prosecutor, that's what I told her the other day. And we understood that to be referring to a defensive attitude. So at the very best, what we had to do was to launch counterattacks to recover any positions that we may have lost. Question. Very well. When you say that he knew the army, are you saying that he did his military service? Answer: yes. And brilliantly. He knew the army perfectly. He knew about weapons. He knew about the weight of weapons, but he never delved into any details about the military operations. Question. Very well.
Vous nous avez parlé tous ces derniers jours
Over the last, when it came to the FDS, was there any point in time during the crisis, January, February, March, or any time whatsoever, when the situation in terms of equipment and weapons became critical for the FDS?
et en particulier pour la gendarmerie?
And more specifically for the gendarmerie and for yourself.
Puis,
Answer. From the very onset of the crisis in 2002, we had serious structural weaknesses when it came to weapons in general and ammunition. We had serious structural problems. Between 2002 and 2003, the authorities tried to raise the level of our weapons. So we were able to obtain some equipment from Eastern Europe, particularly. But for an army which was experiencing structural weaknesses in that area for the last 20, 25 years since its inception in 1960, it was not possible in 2002 to make up for that deficit in that short period. Question. Thank you.
Permettez une seconde.
moment, please.
Monsieur le Président,
Maître Altit, Mr. President, there is an issue I would like to address the chamber on, but which does not deal with the testimony as such, but relates to counsel for the witness. And I believe that the sooner we talk about this, the better. I see that we have a little more than 10 minutes before the break. Thereafter, I'll be looking at another more extended line of questioning. But I'm in your hands, Mr. President, whether I can address that issue now in the absence of the witness.
Of the witness.
non, non, pas du tout.
No, not at all. The counsel can be present. It is in relation to his successor, come to think of it.
Mr. Witness, please, we finish your testimony for the moment now. We will resume it at 11:30, so you can have a longer break. Please, court usher, could you please escort out the witness from the courtroom?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The witness. Thank you, Mr. President.
Maître Altit?
Merci.
Maître Altit. Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe we can do this in private session. Except you...
I don't understand why we should do it in private session.
Très bien.
Maître Altit, very well. Very well then, very well. Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday evening, you told us at the end of the hearing, you indicated that because counsel for the witness would be absent next Monday, the solution suggested was to have a representative of the OPCD to assist the witness during the few days of next week. That would amount to the last part of the witness's testimony. Now, I would like to make things very clear on the matter of the relations between the OPCD and defense teams in general. And let me speak to our case specifically. The person in charge of the OPCD had asked us on the day of the initial appearance to be present in the courtroom on our side, sitting next to us on that day. And then, and I'm speaking for my team, it happened that OPCD assisted us from a logistical standpoint with matters of disclosures. You know, from time to time, there are problems with computers and what have you. So OPCD, through him, gave us genuine and appreciated help when it came to disclosures. So he explained to us that when it comes to disclosures, they have had access right from the beginning. And he explained to us that they have access to our confidential documents right from the very beginning. And as far as I know, they still and have always had access to our confidential documents or our confidential filings. I know, well, maybe I should put it this way. I believe that the relations between OPCD and other defense teams are sometimes more stringent, or rather, put it this way, they have maybe closer or less collaboration with other defense teams. But I don't know about the details because I'm not involved. However, when it comes to our team, this is the relationship we have with the OPCD. So that this clarifies the issue of a possible conflict of interest. And for the purposes of transparency, that's why I make those comments. Thank you.
Else want to intervene? Thank you, Mr. Knops.
Yes, good morning, Your Honors. We have...
I just want to say we have also considered all this, okay? Just to...
Yes.
Okay, please.
Indeed, the relationship between the defense team of Mr. Gbagbo and the OPCD is similar to what the defense team of Mr. Gbagbo just alluded to. They have also assisted us in certain advisory work and have also access to the same material as the team of Mr. Gbagbo. So in the perspective of transparency, I think the court should know that we have the same observations as Mr. Altit just presented to the court. Thank you.
Thank you. Office of the Prosecutor.
We have no objection for Mr. Keita to represent, for the purposes of Rule 74, the witness next week, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have considered all of these things you have mentioned, and nevertheless, we think for the purposes of Rule 74 and looking at Regulation 77 of the regulations of the court, in particular paragraph 4, letters B and F, I think it is the clear mandate of it's one of the clear mandates spelled out clearly in the regulations of the court, of the OPCD, to do what they have been appointed to by the chamber. So for this limited purposes, I think it's really, there is no point of conflict of interest. So this said, I adjourn the hearing to 11:30, and when we continue with the questioning by the by the defense for Mr. Gbagbo. Thank you. The hearing is adjourned.
All rise.